The cold, infinite void of space stretched out like an empty canvas, starless and black, save for the distant glow of Perseus Station. The stellar wind coasted through this darkness, its engines silent as the crew gathered around the control table. The ship's dim lights flickered as if the station itself were unsure of what lay ahead. "Another jump gate anomaly ahead, Captain," Lucan Voss said, his voice calm but tinged with tension. His fingers danced across the hollow keyboard, his eyes scanning the streams of data. "It's unstable." Captain Arya Valen stood at the helm, her hands gripping the cold metal of the console. She was used to anomalies, to strange signals, but this was different. The signal they'd intercepted had been unmistakable. A distress call from deep within the tethered systems. A location no one had dared to venture into for centuries. The crew had seen the legends of the Black Ship. No one had survived an encounter with it, yet here they were, heading straight for its last known coordinates. "We need to prepare for the worst," Arya said. She turned to the others, her steely eyes glinting. "We've all heard the stories, but it's just a ship. We're not going to let it turn us into legends." Ren Caldwell, the grizzled veteran pilot, chuckled darkly. "Legends or not, I've heard the stories too, and I don't think we're ready for what's out there." Suddenly, the alarms blared. An incoming transmission, one too loud, too distorted to ignore. The voice that crackled through the speakers was not human, not even mechanical. It was a whisper, barely audible at first. "It's coming. The darkness. The ship. It's not alone." The transmission cut off, leaving only static in its wake. "This isn't just some derelict ship we're chasing," Nara Quinn whispered, her pale face now flush with the fear she had tried to mask. "It's something far worse." Captain Arya Valen took a deep breath. The stellar wind was already hurtling toward the coordinates, the shadows of distant worlds closing in. The Black Ship was waiting. The stellar wind drifted silently through the darkened expanse of the tethered systems, its engines barely a hum as the crew steeled themselves for what lay ahead. They had passed through the jump gate, a twisting, violent rift that had briefly folded the stars into themselves and now found themselves in a region of space untouched by civilization. No settlements, no stations, just an unsettling silence. Arya stood at the bridge's command console, eyes fixed on the hollow dark ahead. The crew had been expecting to find wreckage or perhaps a distress signal from an old ship, something that might explain the sudden appearance of the Black Ship in the area. Instead, there was only emptiness, an uncanny calm that gnawed at the nerves. "What's our ETA?" she asked, her voice calm but measured. Lucan's fingers moved swiftly across the control panel, adjusting the ship's trajectory as they sailed deeper into the unknown. "We'll reach the coordinates in about 3 hours. After that, well, we'll see what we're dealing with." He turned to face her. His eyes, always sharp and calculating, now seemed slightly distant. "You know," he added almost to himself, "we're not just going to find some derelict ship. It's out there, Captain, and we're about to find out what it really is." Arya held his gaze for a moment before turning away. She didn't need to hear it from Lucan. She'd felt it too. The strange, pulsating pull of the unknown, the magnetic force that seemed to drag them forward, as if the very fabric of space itself was conspiring against them. The Black Ship wasn't just a legend. It was a living nightmare, and they were hurtling straight into its maw. "Everyone, keep your stations," Arya ordered, her tone sharp, even though she could feel the tension creeping through the air. "Stay alert. If anything goes wrong, we move fast. We don't wait for it to come to us." There was a low murmur of agreement as the crew adjusted their positions. Nara, the archaeologist, kept her eyes glued to her data pad, running ancient scans of the area, her brow furrowed with concentration. Ren, seated in the pilot's chair next to Lucan, ran diagnostics on the ship's propulsion system, checking everything for any signs of malfunction. Lyra stood by the engineering console, her fingers tapping nervously on the edges of the holoscreen. "It's too quiet," Lyra muttered under her breath. "No signals, no energy signatures. It's as if the whole system is dead." Arya nodded grimly. "That's what worries me. We could be flying into a trap." 3 hours passed in tense silence. Time seemed to stretch, each minute feeling like an eternity. The vast black expanse of space outside the stellar wind's hull grew ever more oppressive, its empty expanse eating away at the last bits of certainty the crew had. They were coming closer now, and still, nothing moved in the depths of space. Suddenly, without warning, the scanners let out a series of shrill beeps, cutting through the oppressive quiet like a knife. The ship lurched slightly as if pushed by an invisible force. "Damn it!" Lucan cursed, his fingers a blur on the console as he tried to regain control. "Something's messing with the sensors. I can't get a clear reading." "Evasive maneuvers!" Arya barked, her voice unyielding as she slid into her captain's seat, adrenaline suddenly surging through her veins. "Take us out of here, now!" Before Lucan could respond, the lights aboard the stellar wind flickered, once, twice, then plunged the ship into darkness. In the blackness, the unmistakable hum of the engines stopped, leaving only the hollow sound of the crew's breathing and the growing panic that crept into their thoughts. Lyra's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, something's wrong. The energy readings—" Then, without warning, a terrible force slammed into the ship. The crew was thrown into chaos as the stellar wind was tossed violently to the side, her hull groaning as if it were being bent under some unseen weight. Alarms blared and lights flickered. The sound of metal twisting and snapping echoed through the ship. "Hold on!" Arya shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. She fought to keep her hands steady on the console, but the ship felt as though it were being pulled apart, the controls unresponsive as if the very core of the vessel had been severed. "Lucan!" she screamed. "Get us out of here!" Lucan was already on it. His fingers moved in a blur over the controls, sweat running down his face, his eyes wide with panic. But despite his expertise, the ship refused to respond. The tremors were growing more intense now, as if the stellar wind was caught in the grip of something far larger than anything they'd ever faced. A sudden burst of static filled the air, followed by an unearthly, low hum that seemed to vibrate through every fiber of the ship. The crew exchanged frantic glances, fear now setting in. "It's here," Nara breathed, her voice thick with dread. "The black ship. It's using some kind of gravitational field pulling us in." Before Arya could respond, the stellar wind was jerked to a halt, and in the instant of eerie stillness that followed, the crew saw it. The black ship. It wasn't just a ship. It was a presence, a dark, swirling mass of blackened metal and shifting shadows that loomed before them. It dwarfed their vessel, its jagged, broken edges stretching impossibly far into the void. The vessel seemed to ripple in and out of space itself, flickering like a mirage. Its surface gleamed like obsidian, fractured in places by streaks of sickly green light that pulsed with a life of their own. It wasn't just a ship. It was an entity, and it was alive. The crew sat frozen in their seats, staring at the impossible sight that loomed before them. Arya's mind raced, her thoughts clashing with each other as she struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The black ship was no longer simply a legend or a myth. It was here, before them, a manifestation of something far darker than they could have imagined. The ship's surface shimmered again, as if it were reacting to their presence. The space around it bent and distorted, creating ripples in the fabric of space itself. It was not just a craft, it was a tear in reality. "We need to move now!" Ren shouted, his voice filled with urgency. He hit the emergency thrusters, but the ship didn't budge. The stellar wind was locked in place, unable to escape the pull of the black ship's gravitational field. "We can't outrun it," Lucan said, voice shaking. It's like it's alive. I know, Arya replied, her hands gripping the console tightly. She was trying to remain calm, but every instinct in her screamed that they were not just dealing with a ship, but something far more dangerous. But we need to know what it wants. Why is it here? Nara's eyes widened. It's feeding off our fear. What? Ren said, his voice skeptical. That's insane. We're talking about a ship, not some creature. No, Nara said slowly, her eyes locked on the black ship. It's not just a ship. It's a parasite. It feeds on the terror of those who encounter it. That's why it appears out of nowhere, why it's always been linked to destruction. Arya's heart pounded in her chest. What had they gotten themselves into? Suddenly, the ship's systems blinked back online and the warning lights dimmed. But it wasn't the crew's doing. The black ship had released its hold, at least for the moment. Arya didn't hesitate. She slammed the throttle forward, aiming to put distance between them and the towering shadow ahead. But before they could even gain a meter, the black ship's energy field pulsed again, and the stellar wind was rocked by another violent jolt. It wasn't a ship. It was a trap. The reality of the situation hit the crew like a tidal wave. They were not just caught in the pull of an unknown force, they were entangled in the very heart of a cosmic nightmare. The black ship was not merely an object of fear, it was a living entity, ancient and powerful, capable of bending space and time itself. And now the crew had unwittingly crossed its path. We need to find a way to stop it, Arya said, her voice steely as she fought to regain control of the ship. Lucan, what are we dealing with here? Any way to get a reading on its systems? Lucan's fingers flew over the console, his face pale as he scanned for any useful data. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. There's no sign of energy output, no signals, no communications. It's like it's dead, and yet it's not. We've got to get closer, Nara insisted, her voice low but determined. There's something inside it. Something that can tell us how to stop this. Arya looked at her crew, seeing the fear and determination in their eyes. She knew what they were facing was beyond anything they'd ever encountered. But one thing was certain. They weren't turning back now. Not when they were this close. I'll lead the way, Arya said, her voice unwavering. If we have to die in the process, we die together. But we find a way to end this. With a final glance at her crew, she steered the stellar wind toward the massive, looming form of the black ship. It was time to enter the abyss. The stellar wind closed the distance, slowly but inexorably, as if the black ship were drawing them in by its sheer will. The crew remained silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, caught between fear and determination. The darkness that surrounded them deepened with each passing moment, as if the stars themselves had been swallowed whole by the black ship's presence. Arya's hands gripped the console as the ship's hull groaned beneath them. They had passed the point of no return. The strange, pulsating light emanating from the black ship's surface seemed to warp space around them, pulling at their sense of direction and gravity. "Get ready," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "This is where it gets real." The closer they came, the more distorted the view of the black ship became. At first it appeared as a single massive form, until they saw the truth. It was an enormous collection of ships, debris, and dark, twisted shapes fused together. It was as if the ship had consumed entire fleets, merging the wreckage with its own skeletal frame. Broken ships, ancient technology, and unidentifiable objects hung suspended in its outer layers, seemingly held in place by the ship's enigmatic power. "Are we seeing this?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. The lights in the stellar wind flickered again. Suddenly, a harsh buzzing sound filled the air, followed by a grinding noise that reverberated through the walls. The ship's external scanners glitched and then went dead, replaced by static that hummed unnervingly. The controls became sluggish as though the ship's systems were being overwhelmed by an unseen force. "It's like it's messing with our equipment," Lucan said through clenched teeth, his face pale. "The black ship is blocking everything. We're flying blind." Arya stared ahead. Despite everything, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the black ship. The deeper they went into its gravitational field, the harder it was to tell if the ship was moving or if their surroundings were shifting. The view outside seemed to warp and stretch, as if they were no longer bound by the ordinary laws of physics. "We're about to breach it," Arya said, her voice low but steady. "Brace yourselves. This is our only chance." Without warning, the stellar wind was sucked into the black ship's gravity well. The ship shook violently, throwing the crew off balance, and alarms erupted once again. The hull screamed in protest as it was pulled toward the gaping maw of the black ship's center. Everything went black. The stellar wind landed with an unsettling, gut-wrenching thud. There was no smooth docking, no clear indication of a habitable surface. The ship's engines died entirely, leaving them suspended in a strange, oppressive silence. The crew was thrown into disarray, their limbs heavy from the strange atmosphere within the black ship. Arya was the first to move, stumbling to her feet and gripping the console for support. The others followed suit, each one visibly shaken by the sudden, brutal landing. "What just happened?" Ren asked, his voice low and hoarse, as if the force of the landing had knocked the wind from him. "I don't know," Arya replied, her eyes scanning the ship's interior. The lights flickered again, revealing the grimy, dilapidated surroundings, a labyrinth of metal corridors, strange symbols etched into the walls, and an overwhelming sense of dread that pressed on them like a physical weight. "We need to figure out where we are and how to get out of here," Lucan said, his voice laced with panic. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." Nara's eyes were wide, her breath quick and shallow. This ship is alive," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Lyra stepped forward, her face pale and strained. "I think you're right, Nara. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a ship, it's—" She paused, struggling for words. "It's a prison." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. What had they gotten themselves into? Suddenly a voice broke through the silence, a voice that was not human, not mechanical, and yet somehow both. The sound was like a whisper carried on the wind, its words clear but fragmented. "You have come. You are here. You are the key." Arya's hand shot up instinctively, signaling for the crew to remain quiet. But there was no mistake. The voice was coming from everywhere, from the walls, from the air, from the very ship itself. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, and when the voice spoke again, it was clearer, more direct. "The heart of the ship will reveal itself. You are drawn to it, but you will never leave." The walls trembled at the mention of the ship's heart, an ominous vibration filling the air like a distant drumbeat. Nara's eyes widened in realization. "The heart. It's not just a metaphor," she murmured. "The heart of this ship is a literal thing. Whatever it is, it's the source of all this power." The ship seemed to pulse in response, a low, almost imperceptible hum vibrating through the walls. Arya could feel it in her bones. "We need to find it," she said, her voice tight with determination. "Now, before it finds us." The crew moved cautiously through the corridors, each step echoing loudly in the eerie silence. The atmosphere was thick with dread, and each of them couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, no, stalked, by the black ship itself. Lucan led the way, his eyes constantly scanning for any signs of danger. "We should have never come here," he muttered under his breath. "We're walking straight into its jaws." Nara glanced over her shoulder, her face pale. "You don't think I know that? But we don't have a choice now. We're in its domain. It's only a matter of time before—" Before she could finish, the ship shuddered violently. A deep mechanical groan filled the air as the corridor they were walking down twisted unnaturally, bending at impossible angles. Arya caught herself, gripping the wall to steady herself. "Stay together!" she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This place is messing with our perception." The crew stumbled forward, their every step uncertain as they fought the disorienting effects of the black ship's grip on reality. Hallways stretched and twisted before them, only to collapse in on themselves. Doorways appeared where there had been none before, and sometimes what seemed like open space turned out to be a wall of solid metal. "There's no way out," Lyra whispered, her voice full of disbelief. "It's trapping us here." "We're not trapped," Arya said sharply, her resolve hardening. "We're not dying here. We're finding the heart of this damn ship and taking it down." They pushed forward, driven by sheer will. At last, they reached what appeared to be the core of the ship. The room they entered was vast, stretching far beyond the limits of what the ship's external dimensions should have allowed. In the center of the room stood a glowing, pulsating orb, the heart of the black ship. It was alive, breathing, its surface shifting like liquid metal, absorbing the light around it and emanating a sickly green glow. "This is it," Nara breathed, awe and fear mixing in her voice. "The heart, the source of everything." Arya stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch it, but before she could make contact, the heart flared with sudden intensity. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in on them. A voice echoed in their minds, no longer a whisper but a roar that rattled their very souls. "You have come to take what is mine. You will not leave." The heart pulsed violently, and the stellar wind shook with the force of an unseen explosion. They were no longer just fighting a ship. They were fighting a force older than anything they had encountered, a creature that had fed off the fear and despair of those unlucky enough to cross its path. And now, it was time for their final confrontation. As the heart's pulsations grew more intense, the crew of the Stellar Wind realized they had no more time to waste. If they didn't destroy the heart, the black ship would consume them, and every soul it could find in its wake. Lucan, ever the hacker, pulled a device from his belt and began working on the ship's console. "If we can destabilize the energy flow to the heart, we might be able to make it implode," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. Arya nodded sharply. "Do it!" Nara stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the heart. "I can feel it. It's alive. It knows we're here." "Then we make it regret it," Arya muttered. "Let's finish this." With a final desperate push, Lucan worked his magic on the console, sending a surge of energy coursing through the ship's systems. The heart began to quiver, its surface warping violently as if reacting to the breach. The ship groaned in agony, and a deep, oppressive roar filled the air. The heart pulsed once more, this time with fury. The stellar wind trembled as the pulse reached a fever pitch, and Arya could feel the very walls of the black ship warping around them. The air became thick with energy, crackling and snapping like an impending storm. Then, with a final deafening burst, the heart collapsed into itself, a singularity of energy that devoured the very fabric of reality, and everything went dark. The aftermath was a blur. When Arya regained consciousness, she found herself in the wreckage of the Stellar Wind, floating in the debris of the black ship. The black ship was gone, its pulsating heart destroyed, its presence fading from existence. The crew, though battered and exhausted, had survived. But as the stars returned to their places in the sky, Arya knew that the black ship, though vanquished, was never truly gone. It would return. It always did. The cycle was never truly broken. And somewhere in the dark depths of space, the black ship was waiting. The silence was deafening. The stellar wind drifted through the void, its systems powered down but intact. The black ship had vanished, its heart destroyed, Its oppressive influence dissolved, but a cold, eerie emptiness remained in its wake. The crew floated in a limbo of disbelief, the full weight of their survival settling in like an anchor. They had succeeded, or at least they thought they had. Arya rubbed her eyes, still shaken by the intensity of what they had just experienced. Her hands, though steady, ached with the phantom sensation of the ship's pulsing heart, like a heavy drumbeat that still reverberated through her bones. "Is it over?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was staring at the empty space outside the viewport, as if expecting the black ship to materialize again. "We can't be sure," Arya answered, her voice low but resolute. "But we've destroyed its heart. That was the source of its power." "Was?" Lucan's voice cracked, his brow furrowed as he surveyed the console, tapping the screen with increasing frustration. "The systems are all in disarray. I can't get a solid reading on anything. The coordinates are scrambled. It's like we've been yanked out of time." "Maybe we've escaped," Ren said, trying to find some optimism. "Maybe we're free." But even as he spoke, Arya's unease grew. It wasn't just the aftershock of the black ship's destruction that left a gnawing pit in her stomach. No, it was the nagging feeling in the back of her mind that something was wrong. Something they had missed. Nara spoke then, her voice trembling as she tapped into the ship's ancient databases. "Captain, I think you should see this." Arya turned to her, her eyes narrowing as Nara pulled up a series of encrypted files on the screen. They were transmissions, signal bursts from deep space, the kinds of signals that shouldn't have existed. They were encrypted beyond recognition, but Nara had managed to decode some fragments. "It's not possible," Nara murmured, her hand shaking as she traced over the data. "These signals, they're from the black ship, from the heart, but these aren't old transmissions. These are new." "What are you talking about?" Arya's heart skipped a beat. "We just destroyed it. The heart is gone." Nara's eyes met Arya's, a cold dread creeping into her expression. "No, Captain. We didn't destroy it. We disrupted it. The heart might have been shattered, but what we didn't know, what we couldn't have known, is that it had already taken root in something far more complex." Before Arya could process what Nara was saying, the ship's sensors went off again, an urgent beeping that sent a chill through the air. Lucan's face turned pale as he turned back toward the control panel. "Captain, look at this," he said, voice strained. He pointed to the readings flickering across the screen. The ship's scanners were now picking up something, someone, alive in the ship. But it wasn't just one life sign. There were dozens of them, all around them, in the walls, in the very structure of the stellar wind. "How?" Arya gasped, stepping forward. "How is this possible?" The answer came just as the lights in the bridge flickered again, only this time it wasn't a glitch. Something, or someone, was communicating with them. A distorted voice echoed through the speakers. "You did not destroy us." It was the same voice they had heard on the black ship, that strange, omnipresent whisper that had echoed in their minds. "You only delayed the inevitable." Suddenly, the ship's exterior lights flickered to life. A deep, unnatural green glow washed over the stellar wind like a flood. Arya felt a shiver run down her spine as the very air around them seemed to hum with energy. The crew stood frozen as the walls of the bridge began to warp and twist. The once familiar surroundings of their ship bent unnaturally, as if the stellar wind itself was being absorbed into the black ship's lingering presence. Panels melted, floor panels creaked underfoot, and a low, throbbing hum began to emanate from deep within the ship's core. "Get to the escape pods!" Arya ordered urgently, her heart racing. "Now!" But before any of them could move, the distortion hit again. The walls shifted, and in the blink of an eye, the crew found themselves no longer in the bridge. They were standing in a large, darkened room, bathed in the same eerie green light. The air was thick, and the walls pulsed with a life of their own. The stellar wind was no longer in the void of space. They had been pulled into an entirely different dimension, one that existed outside time, outside the physical realm. The floor beneath them trembled as a figure appeared in the center of the room. It was not a human figure. It was an impossibility, its form shifting between shapes, a translucent, shimmering presence that seemed to blur the line between material and immaterial. It was the heart of the black ship. It had found a way to survive, to become something far more terrifying. And it wasn't alone. The walls around them began to fill with countless other shapes, shifting, formless creatures that flickered in and out of existence like ghosts, their dark eyes watching the crew. "We are Legion," the voice from before declared. It was no longer distant. It was everywhere. "You have freed us, but you will never escape." The crew stumbled backward, fear creeping into their minds, but Arya stood tall, her eyes burning with defiance. "You won't win. This ends now." The figure laughed, a sound that echoed through the very fabric of reality, rattling the crew to their core. "You think you can stop what has already begun? The black ship was never a single vessel. It was an idea, a force, and now that force is within you." The ship's control systems sparked and died, and Arya realized what had happened. The black ship had infected them, integrated itself into their very ship, and it had already begun to spread. "No," Lucan whispered, backing away. "This can't be real. We killed it. We—" The figure smiled, its shape shifting into an eerie, twisted reflection of Arya's own face. "No, you did not. You only set the stage." The crew was trapped, locked within the black ship's labyrinth, both inside and outside their reality. They had disrupted the black ship's power source, yes, but they had underestimated its reach. Its influence was far older, far more insidious than they had realized. It wasn't just a ship. It was a collective, a malevolent force that bent reality itself. And now, it was inside them. The crew could no longer escape. The ship was alive in ways they could not comprehend, its presence entwined with their every move. And the black ship's heart had found a new host. Them. Arya could feel it, like a slow burn deep within her veins. The ship's power was taking root, spreading through their minds, their bodies, their very thoughts. The voice spoke again, its words dripping with malevolence. "You will never be free. You will carry us forever." But in that final moment, as the crew braced for the inevitable, something else stirred, something unexpected. To be continued,